Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Jocelyn Hastie spent 30 years as an accountant before the combination of a stage 4 cancer diagnosis and a sudden job loss forced a radical turn, leading her to work full-time with horses as a way to foster leadership skills and personal growth. She joins me to talk about why it's not fair to judge accountancy as boring, how bad management and leadership happens, including her own realization that she was a bad manager, what we lose when we forget the lessons of the natural world and our roots in it, what we can learn from the animals around us, including horses, and more. I think you'll get a lot out of my conversation with Jocelyn Hastie. Jocelyn, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
It is a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
So I start everybody with the same question. Were you a creative kid, or did you discover your creative side later on?
I was not a creative child, farthest thing from it. I really concentrated on maths and sciences, and I loved English, but wasn't crazy about social studies and found art painful. I think because if I look back on it, that was never something that was honored or respected in my family. It was always academics that were really pushed as what was important. What is interesting, though, is after the first art class I did was when I was in my mid-50s, and it was a creative journaling class that I did through a cancer support organization when I was recovering. And I discovered a love of it, even though I really suck. It doesn't matter. I celebrate the suck and do it anyways.
Wow. That's a heck of a long time.
It is. It is.
It is. So not anything creative as a kid is kind of remarkable in its own way, really, because most kids find something somewhere. And yet you're right, because, family influence is huge on that kind of thing.
Yeah, they did encourage me to read, but they didn't encourage me to write or draw or sing. And I'm a terrible singer anyway, so maybe that was for the best. However, I will admit that I sing sometimes. I make up for singing badly by singing loudly, but primarily in the car.
Fair enough. Singing in the car is kind of its own art form, I think.
Or singing for my dogs, and they think I'm terrific. So.
That's their job, right?
That's right.
Yeah. But, I was behind somebody in traffic the other day, and they were having their own special dance party in the car. It was really something. It was almost, to the point of distraction, but I was at a stoplight when I first noticed. So that was good. But it was really, at first it was interesting to notice my own reaction, because at first I was kind of like, whoa, what is going on up there? And then the more I watched, the more I thought, you know what? You're having a great time. You have
you do you, and power to you.
Yeah, you have your own little party up there, and more power to you. So yeah, I think your car is sort of your own little space. Maybe not quite as private as you think it is, since I was kind of watching all of this, but still, there is something kind of magical about singing in your car, dancing behind the wheel, that there's something freeing about that. And maybe it's also just the motion of being in the car. So I think you get a free pass on singing in the car.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Keep doing it then.
Yeah. And singing to your dogs, because your dogs have to love you. You feed them. It's their job.
That's right.
It's totally their job. Yeah.
I tell them until they have a thumb and they can write their own paychecks, they have to just kind of put up with me.
Yeah.
And there are certain expectations that come along with the dog food.
But, they're dogs. So, most dogs are totally cool with that.
That's right.
That's right. So I know that you became an accountant, which we talked a little bit about the fact that accountants get kind of the brunt of the least creative job you can think of, stereotype fairly or unfairly. And I think it's largely unfair at this point after talking to my cousin, the forensic accountant, a couple of years ago. So
Yeah,
I would love to hear what you think about that.
I agree with that. And I really think I was a square peg in a round hole for most of my career. I had an accounting career for over 30 years, but I did things differently to make it more bearable, perhaps. For example, many times I worked on multidisciplinary teams. So I was working with operations and, in the case of the energy and industry, the land department and various other groups, geology, geophysics. So I was the accounting representative on a lot of those because I did tend to be able to look beyond debits and credits more than a lot of the other accountants could. And keep in mind, Nancy, we're talking the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. So this was in a time when things were different. One of the really cool jobs I had, though, that really does show creative accounting was I worked for an energy company in Calgary called Talisman Energy, and they were the largest independent oil and gas company in Canada at that point in time. And they did an awful lot of acquisition and divestiture activity. So we would be negotiating some 400 deals a year and closing on 100 of them. And sometimes the accounting to do, particularly with a property swap, where it was mostly properties, maybe some cash, and valuing the assets so you could recognize gains and losses, could be really very creative. And I used to tell the negotiators, I was the manager of the acquisition and divestiture accounting group, and I told the negotiators, I can make it what you need it to be as long as you can give me supporting documentation. So we might have valued it to do with cash flows. We might have valued it to do with the reserves. So there were actually some pretty creative things I could do in acquisition and divestiture accounting.
That's so interesting because there is the negative stereotype of creative accounting, right? Which basically
absolutely
implies that you're cooking the books. And when I hear you say that, that's kind of where my head goes, but I don't think that's what you're talking about.
It isn't, because it has to be justifiable. So you have to have a reason for valuing it the way you do. So I would tell the negotiators, we need to figure out how to do that. And sometimes I would just have to tell them, no, I can't make that fly. That bird ain't going to fly, no matter, it's too far fetched. But if we could find a really reasonable justification, and I would sometimes help them find that. So like I say, it could be based on the value of the reserves or the cash flow from the property. So there was some creativity involved in that, although certainly there were guardrails, and we needed to be able to justify what we did.
That's so interesting to me because I think a lot of us who don't deal with that kind of thing tend to think that anything to do with money and numbers is a straightforward 2 + 2 = 4. There's no other way to look at that. There's no question. And if you add 2 and 2 and don't get 4, you're doing something wrong or you're doing something shady. But clearly, from what you're saying, and as I'm thinking about other things while you're talking, there are so many different ways to look at all of those numbers. It's not necessarily that simple and straightforward. It's not your elementary school arithmetic class. And so
just think of it this way. Maybe this will help. If you're selling a car, if you sell it to the car lot, you're going to get bottom dollar for it.
Mm-hmm.
If you sell it privately, you might get significantly more. And if you can tell a really good story about that car, it could be a really good price that you create for it. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, is it requires justification, but you can be creative at it, and you can, as long as you can justify it and make it reasonable. I'm not saying I let them get away with crazy stuff.
Right.
I didn't, but I would work with them to try to figure out the best way to do the accounting for a property swap, so that, because you're valuing both the property going in and the property going out.
Mm-hmm.
So there can be some not necessarily creative license, but different justifications for different values.
Yeah, there's
You just
more
have to be able to support it.
there's more subjectivity to all of this than I think most people are aware of, is what it sounds like to me.
I would agree with that comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to me because, I think most of us think that accountants are just people who stare at Excel spreadsheets all day and do the math, and that's it. And that's where, oh, you're going to go off and become an accountant, and that sounds like the most boring thing in the world. I think that's where that idea comes from. But clearly that's not actually accurate.
Well, and I don't think it is. And I think the other thing that people miss is that accountants can add absolutely massive value to an organization by providing financial data that helps the operations groups make really, really good business decisions.
Yeah.
And they can't do that without having accurate financial data. So I definitely see the value in accounting. I don't want to go back and do it anymore, but I understand the value of it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think people who haven't done it don't get that it's not what they think it is necessarily. And I think, that was kind of my big surprise when I interviewed my cousin. And certainly forensic accounting is a whole different angle, but even just getting that new basic understanding from her was really eye-opening for me. And then again, when we talked briefly and you kind of echoed the same thing, I was like, yeah, we unfairly malign accountants as these boring number crunchers, and it's not fair.
Yeah. A lot of us do not live up to the stereotypes.
Yeah.
I do have to say, though, when I talk to people and they find out that my background is accounting, I really love it when they say, I never would have pegged you for an accountant.
But that's the stereotype, right?
It is.
Yeah. I mean, I would never say that my cousin is a, boring, uninteresting kind of person, which I think is what most people think of when they think of an accountant. And so it's that unfair stereotype again.
Yeah, I will guarantee you absolutely every personality type profile I have ever filled out has never put me as an accounting being my ideal profession.
So how did you pick it?
I picked it because, for two reasons. My father was an accountant. And the second reason I picked it was I really, really loved money as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And in Canada at that point in time, you could do an accounting designation, certified general accountant, part-time in the evening rather than going to university full-time. So that was what I did. So I could earn a full-time income and get an education at the same time. So that was a big contributing factor to me making that decision that accounting was going to be the way that I would, the road I would travel.
There you go.
I couldn't do the delayed gratification of 4 years of university.
Sure. So how long did you stay in accountancy?
30 years total, 30 to 35. Yeah.
And
there were a couple of years where it was part-time when I was recovering. I was off work for almost a full year and then on a graduated return for a year. So
and what led to you leaving?
What led to me leaving is the thing about accounting is it was easy. I was really good at it. I could make a very good living, and I had an ideal setup in terms of I live in the country on a horse ranch, but my employer was only 8 minutes away from me because I worked at a natural gas processing facility out of town as finance manager. So it was pretty easy. I only worked 4 days a week. I had a really good income and it was very comfortable to me. I had a horse trainer on staff that took care of the ranch and my horses. And it was easy enough that I never would have been brave enough to make the change. And then the day I was removed from long-term disability, the gas plant went bankrupt and my job was gone.
Ooh.
Same day, June 30th, 2016.
Wow.
And I could not, I'm about an hour and 15 minutes away from downtown Calgary, which most jobs I would have gone to as a finance manager would have been in downtown Calgary. And I just knew that after my recovery, I was too fatigued to be able to do 2.5 hours a day of commuting and an 8-hour workday and take care of the ranch. It was just going to be far too much for me. So I decided to take off in an entirely different path and started partnering with my horses to help women really learn about their own empowerment and step into their personal power.
That's definitely a massive turn. And before we totally go there, you'd mentioned, and you keep, since you've mentioned recovery and we haven't really talked about that, you did mention to me that your diagnosis was also a major turning point. And so
it was, yeah. I had, sure. About 2 years before I was diagnosed, though, what I learned when I got involved with the horses was that I didn't like the person I was, and I didn't like the leader that I was. I had largely learned to lead staff. I'd been leading staff since I was 22 years old. I was in my first supervisory position. And I thought I was a good supervisor. What I found out was I was a very, very good technical accountant. I was fast, I was accurate, and that was why they chose me for supervisory and managerial roles. After I'd been doing it for 8 years and I discovered horses. Now, horses walk all over doormats and they avoid bullies, and my horses avoided me. So I did a lot of soul searching and realized that they really needed me to be congruent, to be honest about who I was and how I was showing up with them. When I was centered and grounded when I was around them, they would follow me anywhere and they would really work hard to please me. But I did discover that I used either bullying or bribery. So with the horses, I'd try to give them horse cookies to get them to like me, or carrots. And with my staff at work, I would bake every 2 weeks. I'd bring cookies in on Fridays that I would bake for my staff. So I discovered that I really didn't like the person that I was. And in 2012, I enrolled in a 2-year program called Equine Gestalt Coaching. So I really explored how horses could help people. And I finished that in 2012. And I really do credit the horses and what I learned in that coaching program for saving my life, truly.
That is so
I don't think I would have survived without having the horses to get back to. A reason to live. There's an excellent book, just as a tiny aside, an excellent book called Radical Remission, written by Dr. Kelly Turner, a PhD. And what she did was examine people that had had radical remissions from cancer and what they had in common. So she examined the outliers and some of the most important things, in addition to diet and exercise, which you'd expect, is having a mindfulness practice and also having a reason to live and support around you. So I found that the horses gave me a reason to live, and they are very calming. They, for me, are very calming presences. Just they hold space for me to deal with my own stuff. And I wanted to be able to help other people have that experience as well. So I believe that in that case, things happened for a reason. I finished that training and then really had enough self-awareness that I could examine whether I wanted to stay on this plane or move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so interesting to me, your comment about being promoted to supervision because you were a really good technical accountant.
Mm-hmm.
What does that have to do with being a good leader?
Absolutely nothing. But that is
Right.
the way our world works.
Right. And it makes no sense. And, what do people complain about most about their jobs? 9 times out of 10, at least, it's bad management. And you see
Absolutely.
bad management because people get promoted because they're good at their jobs, not because they're good leaders. And so often they're given no management training whatsoever. And no
Right.
one cares about that part. And then they wonder why the staff is unhappy. Well, because they're being managed by people who don't have any management skills.
That's right. And I think that's a big issue. And I have done some training, like particularly in the area of delegation for the CPA Association, Chartered Professional Accountants Association here in Canada. So in the area of delegation, because I believe that delegation is absolutely a top way to teach people new skills on the job. I'm a strong believer in delegation. And I also understand that if you are one of those managers that is extremely technically competent, it's really hard
Yeah.
to turn over the reins. So I built a little process that helps them do that gradually and build the trust between them and their employees and look at things like how risky is what they're doing, what are the repercussions if it goes off the rails, and starting with simpler processes and thinking about very consciously thinking about just how much authority you hand over to people and do it gradually so that they prove themselves to you, so that you can feel more comfortable handing over more authority and getting them involved in bigger, more important jobs.
Yeah. And that's how people grow and how you build the trust and how everything works better.
Yeah,
And
so I'm an absolutely firm believer in delegation and how important it is, and how important it is when that you as a supervisor understand that you may delegate responsibility or you may delegate the doing of the work. You don't delegate the responsibility for it if it's still residing within your group. You are ultimately responsible,
yeah.
and you don't get to blame somebody if they didn't do it.
Oh, I wish more people understood these things. It's amazing to me how many people don't get. And that's, to me, it seems so basic. But I
It
think,
does to me now, and I have to tell you, it didn't until
yeah,
I learned to be a leader that I truly believe is worthy of being followed. When my horses
right.
started following me, I was authentic enough and real enough that people started following me too. And the thing that I found that's really interesting is when I became more and more authentic, it is absolutely true that more people disliked me, but there were certainly many more people that liked me, and far fewer that sat in the middle
Mm-hmm.
and were ambivalent about me.
That's interesting too. Were the people who then disliked you people who had originally liked you more? Or, I mean, was it a
Yeah, at
reversal?
the point in time when because I was really odd. I was kind of a combination between a people pleaser and a bully. And I did what I thought I had to do to get things done, and I wasn't authentic in doing it. And I was quite prepared to flatter someone who didn't, for something very tiny,
Mm-hmm.
just to get them to like me and be more willing to do the things I needed them to do in their positions. So I do believe that as I learned to draw boundaries and be really clear on what worked for me and what didn't, there were more people that disliked me, and that was okay with me.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I really discovered was that I had spent a great deal of time in my life trying to get people that didn't like me to like me, even if I didn't like them or respect their opinions.
Yeah.
I still wanted them to like me.
Isn't it amazing how we do that?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mentioned the cookies, so I'll mention it again. It's kind of a funny story. When I had that staff of 5, I had one woman in particular that really disliked me, rolled her eyes at everything I said, and her disapproval of me was pretty obvious. But every other Friday, I would bake cookies for the staff, and I would let each of them pick their favorite cookie that I would bring in. And she didn't pick easy cookies like oatmeal or peanut butter cookies. She picked snickerdoodles. Now, anyone that makes snickerdoodles knows they are a pain to make because you have to chill the dough and you have to chill the cookie sheets. And if you don't, you get one flat, crunchy snickerdoodle instead of fluffy, chewy snickerdoodles. And I made the snickerdoodles, even though it was a pain. And you know what? She ate my snickerdoodles and she still rolled her eyes at me. So something I asked myself when I turned myself inside out trying to get someone to like me is, why am I baking these cookies?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're baking them because you love someone and you want to give them something that you've made by hand, that's fabulous. But if you're just doing it to try to curry favor, you might want to rethink whether you're making cookies at all, let alone snickerdoodles.
Right, right. And I think, there's this whole societal thing that says that we need to make sure everybody likes us, which is impossible.
Right.
No one is, there is no one that everyone likes.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere, you can be the sweetest, juiciest peach in the world, and to someone who doesn't like peaches,
Yeah.
they're not going to find you appealing.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say maybe Dolly Parton is the only person in the world that everybody likes, but I'll bet you there's somebody who doesn't like her too. I mean, it's just not possible. So, at some point you just have to say, okay, fine. There are people who don't like me. Great. Move on.
Yeah. And the reality is I don't like everybody either.
Right. It would
and that doesn't mean I don't have to be nasty to them, but I don't have to choose to hang out with them either.
Right. Right. There's no need to torture yourself.
Right.
Or them. There's room for everybody to do their thing and move on.
I remember having a boss once that I said to him, you don't like me and that's okay, but I really wish you'd respect the work I do.
Yes. And that's a crucial difference
that
I don't think we often remember,
Yeah, and then of course he was all flustered. Oh yeah, I like you fine. And I said, no, you don't. And it doesn't matter. That's not what I'm losing sleep about. What I'm losing sleep about is you're disrespecting the work I'm doing.
Right. Right. Yeah. Ugh. Like I said, there's so much bad management and so little concern about that. And that's the kind of thing that, someone like that isn't even able to distinguish between, I don't have to like you, but you can still do good work and I can still be okay with that fact, even if you're not my personal cup of tea. Right. And I mean, that seems really basic, and yet for a lot of people, it just isn't. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you figured it out, and I'm fascinated that it was the horses that taught you.
I look back, Nancy, and I always, always, always wanted pets and wanted animals around me. And my parents really didn't want that for me. And I think my life would have been very different had I had more access to the animals. I think I would have been a more compassionate person from a much younger age had I had more exposure to animals.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's funny, I was thinking before we started here a little while ago, I grew up in a little neighborhood, way down a side street across from a horse pasture. The people who built the development lived down this little side street, and they had their own horses. And so, certain nights after dinner, the horses would be out, and my mom would give us a carrot and go over and feed the horses and talk to them and whatever. And it's a wonder to me that I never really thought about until this morning that I did not end up being totally nuts about horses just because they were there. And I remember, around third grade, somebody in my class saying that, they wanted to have a pony as a pet. And the teacher saying, well, you can't do that because you don't live in a place where you'd be allowed to have a pony as a pet. And I'm like, but there's horses right across the street from my house. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. They were there. I never had the desire to go horseback riding, but I loved that they were there and we could kind of climb up the fence a little bit and pet them and, feed them and just kind of be like, oh, there's horses.
Yeah. And it's even for someone like me, I did compete with the horses for 25 years. I showed once I got into horses, I got in big time.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, I had a horse trainer on staff, and I really find that some of the most amazing times I have had with them have not been in the saddle, but on the ground. And one of my very favorite things in the world to do in the wintertime is to go outside on moon shadow nights. My horses are on 100 acres. And I go out, and when they hear me, they will come and investigate. And the winter nights with the moon shadows and the horses there it is absolutely magical, and it fills my soul.
I bet.
And I always find it interesting when people ask me about the on-ranch retreats I do, because with the on-ranch retreats, Nancy, there's no riding.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm such a firm believer that building the relationship with them is much easier to do actually on the ground than if you're an inexperienced rider and you're trying to manage all the technical things of riding. But just being with the horses on the ground and grooming them, you can learn to create a connection with something that you think of as much bigger and stronger than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the other work I do is just a very simple obstacle course, and people lead the horses through the obstacle course. And for many women, it's the first time that they can feel a sense of competence in leading something that is so much bigger and so much stronger than they are. And what I really want them to do is gain the somatic awareness, like feel in their belly what it felt like to be a leader to something that's so much bigger and stronger than they are. I think there's magic in that.
It sounds like it. And, I mean, I've heard off and on over the last 20 or 30 years about horses being used in different kinds of therapy. And I find it so fascinating because it kind of makes sense to me. And it also kind of just sounds so out there all at the same time.
Right. And my goal is never, ever, ever to turn people to turn women into horse women and to have them move out to the ranch. That's never what my goal is. What my goal is to open their mind to the many different ways they can practice being a leader and the many different teachers that are around them that they may have completely overlooked.
Mm. Yeah.
And if I can open their minds to that and give them the experience of being a leader to something that could really choose to tell them, I'm not interested, and could do something about it, if I can give them those experiences, I think that can change their lives. I really do.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And I'm curious, you talk about the other leaders and influences around them, what all that might include.
It can be your dogs. It can be learning to slow down because you're in such a beautiful park and you see the birds. It can be that. Those are the kinds of experiences I'm talking about. And if you stop being so busy in the everyday and can learn to take just those micro pauses, that's meditation to me. And that is really developing self-awareness. To take that time and think about, how do I feel about that? Instead of just saying, it's not that big a deal. It's not worth getting excited about. Maybe it is. Check it out. Are you still thinking about it 5 hours later? Are you still mad at that guy that cut you off in traffic? If it is, maybe it was that big a deal. Or maybe it isn't the guy in the traffic that you're mad at all.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that time in nature, around horses, around dogs, around a tree, can give you so much self-awareness when you take the time to center and ground yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we've had all of that so trained out of us that
We
we
have.
don't even notice it. I mean, there's a little park near my house, and I love to go out and walk the paths in the park. And sometimes I'll listen to a podcast or an audio play, but sometimes I just want to go and turn it off and walk around and really pay attention, because I know if I'm listening to the podcast or something else, I'm not probably really paying attention. I mean, I'm seeing things, but I'm not hearing the birds. I'm not hearing the wind. I'm not really fully experiencing being out there. And it is a really different experience when I don't have something in my ears distracting me, except for the sound of my own voice, which can be plenty distracting on its own, but it's still not the same as an external thing pumping into my brain. So I'm much more likely to notice how I'm walking, how it feels while I'm walking, the way the light is coming through the trees, the deer on the other side of the park, all of those things. If I say, no, I'm leaving the headphones at home today, and I'm just
something I've taken to doing just recently is, it's a 40-minute drive to Calgary, just to the city limits from my place, and it's 30 minutes to the town that's closer than that, and 25 to the other. So anywhere I go, I've got nearly an hour of drive time to get there. And I have taken to no sound in the car. I've taken to no radio, no podcasts, just being in the car and noticing my thoughts. And that's made a difference for me too. I don't do a lot of sitting quietly and meditating the way most people do, but I do take that time to think when I'm in the car. And I also do it when I used to listen to podcasts when I was out feeding the horses and doing chores. And I don't do that anymore either. Now I just pay attention to the dogs and the horses while I'm feeding them, and make sure that it doesn't just become chores, that it becomes an experience.
Yeah, I bet it's a very different experience too.
Well, but I think, like people that live in the city, if you're a mom and you've got kids, making a meal for your family can be a spiritual experience, that you are nourishing your family.
Sure. If they're not all screaming at you while you're doing it.
Well, there's that
which is my first thought. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there is so much chaos and so much distraction, and we've forgotten that some of that at least is optional.
Yes.
I certainly can be the kind of person who always wants to be, ooh, that book sounds really interesting. I want to read that next. And, oh, I want to listen to that podcast because that sounds really fascinating. And so it's like, I can fall into that trap of always wanting to pour new information into my head. And it's very interesting. And it's not like I regret doing that. But at the same time, I think you can have too much of a good thing.
Right. And I think that when you do fill your brain so quickly and you don't take time to contemplate the things you've learned, they don't really stick, even if they were
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating at the time. And one example I think about is the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Mm-hmm.
I read that book 4 times a year, and
Wow.
every time I read it, I swear that they put new pages in there.
Yeah.
Because I'm in a different place and there's a different message that I needed to hear that
Mm-hmm.
comes through. And it's a fairly small book. It doesn't take long to read.
Right.
But every time I read it, there is something, it's to me a really deep book, and there's something in there that I needed to hear that time that I didn't necessarily need to hear before.
Yeah. And you hear it differently each time, I'm sure, because as you said, you're in a different place. And so something that you understood one way the first or second time probably means something different the sixth or seventh time, too.
Yeah, I heard it described this way once that I really loved. There's just in case learning, which is what you're talking about, that, oh, that would be interesting, and I might like that. And then there's just in time learning, where there's a specific topic that you need some help with, and that's what you focus on. And I'm trying to spend less time on the just in case learning and an awful lot more on the just in time learning, really focusing on the things that I think are going to help me move forward more effectively.
Yeah. That's an interesting way of looking at it, too. I like that.
Yeah, I did too. I thought that was really interesting. I wish it was me that created it. It wasn't. Actually, that was Danny Eny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. He has a way of coming up with memorable ways of putting things like that, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you had sort of a how's the right way to put this? Like a defining unexpected moment
Hmm.
in terms of a diagnosis that changed everything on top of that, you know, job situation changing radically. And that changed everything for you.
Hmm.
And sometimes, you hear stories like that a lot. I've heard so many stories of people who, got a diagnosis that totally shifted the way that they looked at life.
Right.
And while I don't think anyone wants that kind of scary diagnosis, there are moments when I've thought, I kind of want the radical shift that comes along with
Hmm.
it. I would prefer it not to come with the scary diagnosis, but I'd kind of like that shift. And I don't think it works that way. But I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts about, for somebody who hasn't had that that scary moment, like how do we get to that shift? Do you think it's possible to get to that kind of shift without it? Because it seems like it's easier when you have that make or break moment that kind of
Right.
forces you into it.
I think the universe hands us learning opportunities all the time. And I think sometimes it just starts as the tiny little knock. Hey, are you listening? And when that doesn't work, the universe gives you more opportunities to learn until if you are as independent as I was, and in many ways all knowing as I thought I was, because I'd been so competent at work and that kind of thing, I really did think I had it all figured out. And I think some of the things that I really needed to learn, one of the most important lessons I learned was allowing other people to help me. Because here I was, finance manager at the natural gas plant. I had bought raw land and built the farm, and I'd done it all. I rode a motorcycle. I mean, I just, sisters were doing it for themselves. And I was fine with paying someone like my trainer to work for me. But when people would just offer to help me, I would almost feel indignant that they thought I couldn't manage things myself, rather than appreciating that someone cared about me enough to say, I know you can do it alone. I just don't think you should have to. And it wasn't until I was literally brought to my knees that I learned the grace to allow other people to help me. And that was a lesson I don't know, because it had been so ingrained in me as a child to be independent and not to cry and take care of things. It had been so ingrained in me. I don't know that I would have learned that any other way, Nancy. For me, that was necessary, but I absolutely, sincerely hope that other people listen to the knocks before the baseball bat. And don't go through what I did. And I consider that part of my mission in this world, is sharing that message. And some people will get it and others will be like I was and need to learn it the hard way. But if I could get just a few people to pay more attention to it before the baseball bat, I would really feel like I'd made a difference in this world. And a much bigger difference than financial statements with 30 pages of notes.
Yeah, I can see that, and I think that's an admirable goal. And I think you're right that there are the little knocks and whispers, and the challenge is to pay attention to them in the world that tells us, oh, that's not a big deal.
Yeah, that's right.
Keep going, keep driving, keep pushing, keep pushing yourself, even if it's not good for you, and it'll all be okay.
And I think for me, it started very, very, very young. Like, when I was born, my father was absolutely convinced I was going to be a boy. And my nickname was Charlie till I was 10.
Wow.
And I put a lot of pressure on myself, even as a small child. I didn't want to be better than the men. But darn it, I did not want to accept less than the boys just because I was a girl. Even as a small child, I remember having those thoughts that I was not better than the boys, but I was as good as any boy. I was just as smart and just as capable as any boy. Now, in my family, athletics were not valued either. So arts and athletics weren't valued at all. It really was academics that were valued. And fortunately, I was smart enough that I got some approval for that. So I think that really set me up for an awful lot of how I lived my life. And I think for me, it did take the baseball bat of stage 4 cancer to get me to pay attention. And I don't want anyone else to have to do that.
Yeah. It's just thinking about, how those things in childhood that, our parents don't knowingly set us up to have a hard time. And yet so often they do set us up to have a hard time without realizing it. Yeah.
And I don't think it was malicious at all.
No, not at all.
But to have that feeling, even as a small child, that I even got my gender wrong.
Right. That's huge. I mean, that's and
it did set me up for a lifetime of which is a good and a bad thing. It set me up for a lifetime of not accepting less because I was born with ovaries instead of testicles. And I never wanted to be a man either.
Right.
I really didn't. I always wanted to be a woman. I just was frustrated that women seem to have such a hard time compared to men, especially. And then I went into the field of accounting, and not just the clerical, but the supervisory management role, and in the energy industry, which is super male dominated. What's really interesting now with horses is my favorite horses for the last 20 years have been stallions. And it's been because I absolutely love the dance of the feminine and the hyper masculine together. And it's not over dominating them, it's creating a partnership with them. And it's magical when it happens.
Can you say a little more about that? Because that sounds really interesting.
Sure. Stallions, people misinterpret stallions and they think they're the boss, and the stallions are not the boss, they're the protectors. The horse in the herd that makes the decisions about where they're going to graze and when they're going to go for water is the mare, the alpha mare. And the way the alpha mare is chosen is the alpha mare is the one that keeps the other horses safe. And the stallion's role, so she chooses where they're going to be in terms of grazing and that kind of thing, and when they're going to move. And the stallion will be on the lookout to make sure that indeed she has chosen a safe place, and if she hasn't, to fend off predators and that kind of thing. So what horses are looking for from people is safety. So they want to be with someone who will make decisions for them to keep them safe. And once you've established that you are a leader worthy of following, that they're not going to get hurt when they're with you, they're not going to get scared when they're with you. And if they do get scared, they'll get over it because you'll help them get over it. For example, a plastic bag floating across a field. When a horse first sees that, they honestly believe it might kill them. So they are afraid for their lives when they're younger and inexperienced, and they'll run from it. But when the rest of the herd just looks up, sees it's a bag, and goes back to grazing, the young ones will also learn that, okay, that's not something to be afraid of. When you, as the horse's trainer, can expose them to things that scare them a little and they learn that they don't get hurt, they learn to trust you. So leadership with the horses is all about safety. And I think that is true of humans as well. That even if we're in a group where someone has the power, someone is the leader by the position they're in, perhaps, there is always someone in the group that everybody looks to see how are they taking this. There always is. And that's the kind of leadership and power I'm talking about, is the leadership through influence and through having created a relationship where the other person trusts you. And what's interesting with horses is because they are prey animals, they are hyper aware of their environments. And they see things that they think may hurt them that really won't. But the magic with them is that there is nothing they want more than to get back to grazing. And we as humans can take a long time before we get back to grazing. We relive the things that scare us over and over again. So that's another really magic thing I've learned from horses, is to live in the moment and get over it and get back to grazing as soon as I possibly can, to find the things that comfort me so that I can get my equilibrium back.
That's really powerful. Because you're right. An awful lot of us just get into that loop.
That's right.
Never let it go. And want to, but don't know how. Because we know that
it's not good for us.
It's exhausting, among other things. And nobody wants that, but we don't know how to let go of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So just watching the horses do it, and they do physical things that they need to do. They'll shake it off. And so do dogs. They do a big shake after they've been scared. And if we need to do that, I invite people to do that. If you need to do that, shake out your arms and whew, that was scary. And that is exactly what the horses do after they realize that plastic bag isn't dangerous. What they do is say, whew, that was scary. I'm glad it's over.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing that I've heard over and over again over the last couple of years that, we've been trained not to do as humans, that we've been trained to just ignore
We
it.
we don't say, ooh, that was scary.
Yeah, we don't shake it off.
We say, that it wasn't that bad. Well, we've got that pit in our stomach.
Yeah. And the funny thing is we tell each other to just shake it off or brush it off, but we're not allowed to actually shake it off.
Yeah.
It's in the language.
Yeah, part of the Gestalt coaching that I took really does talk about honoring your body. And if you need to shake it off, shake it off. And if you're not comfortable shaking it off in front of people, go to the bathroom and shake it off.
Yeah.
Take a few deep breaths, practice box breathing, get yourself out of the alarm and back into your prefrontal cortex, start thinking again. Because when the alarm bells are going off, you're not thinking.
You're not doing much of anything.
No. Yeah. You're just alarming.
Yes.
And alarming everyone around you.
Right.
We don't think about how much the energy we take into a room affects the people that are in that room.
Yeah, because we've been trained to try to hide it and we assume that we can.
Yeah, we live in denial of our own emotions, and often we push them down, and it's not till we're overwhelmed that we actually realize, I guess I got to look at this.
Yeah, it's that metaphor of trying to hold down the beach ball underwater. Like you can try and you can try and you can try, but eventually that sucker's going to pop right back up.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating about the horses and the plastic bag and all of that, though.
Yeah.
You're making me wish I had paid more attention as a child to the horses across the street, Jocelyn.
Yeah. They have been some of my life's greatest teachers, and those really, the living in the herd, getting along with the herd, understanding herd dynamics has been huge lessons for me, and also the getting back to grazing, living in the moment and getting back to grazing.
Yeah.
I considered it a huge compliment when people would come onto my farm when I was still actively showing and say, this doesn't feel like a show barn. The horses are happy, and even my best show horses would be out in a 30-acre pasture. And you know what? There's badger holes in that pasture, and I didn't try to protect them from the world. I tried to give them life with friends and as normal a life I could, except for when we packed them up to take them to a horse show.
Yeah.
I didn't bubble wrap them, and
no.
I let them live their lives, even very valuable horses.
Yeah. I mean, that seems much more humane than the alternative.
Yeah. And I've never kept my horses in barns in the winter. They've always been outside, even when it's 30 below. I make sure they've got really good shelter and they've got lots of hay to eat so they stay warm, but they do fine. It's us that has the big hang-ups about it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean I toss them out in October and I don't look at them again till April either. I mean, every day I have them come in. I give them apples every day just so they'll come in and I can get a look at them and make sure they're okay, because I'm down to just 5 horses now. And in the one pasture, they're 27, 26, and 26 years old. So they're quite elderly, and they're doing okay. I mean, they're a little arthritic. When they get up, they have to stand for a little bit and kind of get their footing again, but they get around just fine, and they're pretty happy horses, even at those advanced stages. So I think I like to think I'm doing something right with them being that age and still doing really well.
Sure. That's amazing. So if people want to learn more about what you do and how they can come learn more with you, where do they need to go?
Well, probably the best thing to do is you can find me on either Facebook or LinkedIn. I also do have a web page, thecowgirlscode.com, cowgirls with an S. And I offer what might be interesting to your listeners is once a month I offer a program where I built what I call the Cowgirls Code, which is my seven standards of behavior. And what I do once a month is help people walk through discover their own core values and start to work on their own code of conduct. And I offer that free of charge once a month. And that you can find on thecowgirlscode.com/free. Has a whole bunch of things that are coming up. I'm speaking at a couple of events, some online, some in person. I have tickets available for those that are free as well. All on thecowgirlscode.com/free.
All right. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes so everybody can find you. And hope we'll check it out. I may show up at one of those sessions because I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, so, I'd love to have you there. You are more than welcome.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming and spending some time with me today. This has been really, really interesting.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I did too.
That's this week's episode. Thanks so much to Jocelyn Hastie and to you. Jocelyn's links are in the show notes. I hope you'll leave a review for this episode. There's a link in your podcast app, and it is super easy and really makes a difference. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do share it with a friend. Thank you so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.